So we're going to go ahead and get started, but I'm going to start first with just a few questions for Imam Omar. So what is... I'm going to let him drink his chai first. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to combine the Q&A together, inshallah. So the first question, this one got a lot of votes. What is your opinion on young females traveling away from home for a good college? Let's start at the end. Nope. All right, Sister Lubna. What is your, if I can have everyone please, if you're leaving, let's keep it down. What is your opinion on young females traveling away from home for a good college?
You already laughing? I can say this much, I did, and it was life-changing. If I actually was intending on staying at a local college, I'd gotten a full ride there, but my mom actually encouraged me to go to the University of Michigan, and I was actually started pre-med, and because it was such a prestigious campus and had so many different programs and all of that, I started taking other classes, and honestly, it was the connections and the experiences, the prestigious teachers and professors there that got me interested in studying religion. I switched to early Christianity, dropped pre-med to my mother's surprise, and eventually did Islamic studies. But honestly, I look back and subhanAllah, because I was so close going to a community college, not a community college, but a local college. And if I had not gone to that college and I had not met the professors who actually nominated me for fellowships and scholarships I didn't even know about. All of these connections you wouldn't have been able to make at a local college. That changed my life, and I can only speak to that, as I have said multiple times. I won't answer the fiqh answer to that. So. Okay. Jazakallah.
I have a sibling who slanders other siblings. I choose to ignore him or her completely. I have a non-conflict personality. I say salam if I see them. Am I okay? I have a sibling who slanders my other siblings. I choose to be non-confrontational, basically. Is that enough?
Yeah. You have kids.
This one, does this come? Alhamdulillah. Okay, this one's for you then. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. You have a sibling that slanders the other one and you stay silent. You're non-confrontational. Alhamdulillah, I mean, this situation may be beyond you, but I would like to say this, that not saying anything is not helpful in the long run. And not wanting to be non-confrontational, or I'll say it the opposite, which means the same thing, or now I've lost myself. Avoiding confrontation is not a good thing. Temporarily, it can be something good in the moment. You know, you want to de-escalate. Sheikh Yasser just talked about people who are foolish and they're argumentative, and just leaving it alone is good. But if this is a constant issue, this is something you absolutely should address. If you feel like you can address this with your parents, please do so. If you don't think that they have maybe the capacity or the resources to handle this in a good situation, speak up for yourself and say to the sibling, it really hurts my feelings when you talk about my other sibling that way. Put it on you. I feel hurt. When you start with an I statement, it automatically takes the defensiveness out of the recipient. If I start with like, you keep saying the bad thing about my sibling and I don't like it, all of a sudden that person's gonna be defensive. But if you say, I feel really hurt when you say something about my sibling. I love you and I love them too, and I wish you wouldn't do that anymore. You know, be clear about how it makes you feel and what you would like to see. I wish that you would maybe talk about a situation, but don't badmouth my sibling. And this will be very powerful. This will not only help you draw boundaries within your family, but this is a teaching moment for yourself, and you're gonna learn. Yes, it's uncomfortable, and yes, it doesn't feel good to be confrontational, but in this healthy way, you're learning to set up these boundaries for future relationships whether it be a marriage relationship or work boundaries or school boundaries. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you in that, inshallah.
If my father makes money in a way that isn't halal, how does that affect me and my college and other expenses, such as him paying for Umrah and so on?
There's a principle in the Sharia, which is that there are two types of haram money. There's money that's stolen or money that's occupied. Just to work on the same concepts we spoke about, think about ta'addi, through the wronging of someone else. And there is money that's earned in haram ways. Money that is stolen, knowingly stolen, you cannot benefit from even as another person. So if someone gives you that money and you know that it's stolen, then you are not allowed to benefit from it. As for money that is earned in haram ways, the principle is haram li nafsihi, halal li ghayri. It is haram for that person to benefit from. It is halal for other than that person to benefit from. And so it does not affect the spouse, it does not affect the children, it does not affect anyone else who benefits from that money if a person gives it in charity. And there is some scholarly basis, some people will mention using that money even in sadaqah. If a person wants to make tawbah from riba or from haram, that they put it towards something that's not literally aklul riba, like eating or consumption because of the prohibition on that. I don't see that as the case. I think that the principle applies. So using that money for sadaqah is a way of tawbah for that person to give that money in charity as well. Some people use the incident of Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl, before Islam, when they were rebuilding the Kaaba, he stood up and he said that when we rebuild the Kaaba, not to use any haram money. And what he meant by that, he said money from gambling, prostitution, and filthy ways that, again, were recognized as wrongful ways of earning. And so they weren't even able to rebuild the full Kaaba. They built it as a cube because they didn't have enough money with their halal money or their good money to make a full rectangle, which is the original shape of the Kaaba. However, Abu Jahl has no bearing in usul al-fiqh. All right, so there's a moral principle to that, which is that, when you give sadaqah, try to give from your best money and that people should use their best money. But the saying of Abu Jahl has no bearing in the law itself or in jurisprudence. So when spouses or children benefit from that money, it's fine. However, last thing on this, if a spouse wants to push his or her spouse towards earning halal and undertakes actions in the process of that, such as, or making a big deal about the money that's coming into the house, saying like, I'm not going to eat from your food or your earnings, I'm going to earn my own halal just so I can eat from halal. If the spouse undertakes those types of actions as a means of deterring their spouse from earning haram, then that's praiseworthy as well, inshallah ta'ala. But there's no sin on the person who benefits from money, because the way you receive that money is halal, which is a parent to a child or a spouse to a spouse. The way they receive that money was haram. Allah ta'ala.
How should one vote then on issues that are considered problematic in our society, such as legalization of weed and abortion and so on?
Tesneem, run away. No. Do you want to?
I can only speak to weed.
Lubna said she could talk about weed. Marijuana is a very tricky one because on one hand, I don't think that we should be for legalizing it, but I do think we should be for decriminalizing it because of the way that it's been used to impact communities that have already suffered so much. So it's been used to literally ruin lives. So I think that we can comfortably as Muslims be against decriminalization. I don't think we can be for legalization of marijuana because it would be for legalizing something that is prohibited in our faith. By the way, just as I want to give you guys something just as a practical example of what I was talking about earlier. In Irving, Texas, there was a recent vote on legalizing the sale of hard liquor. We had been a dry county for a very, very long time. Muslims or I encourage the community, and we came together with communities that typically do not do anything with the Muslim community. And, you know, we were actually on the opposite side of people that would count themselves as allies of the community, but we talked to them in private and said, listen, this is why we're against hard liquor. This is why we're against these things happening in our community. And so, again, I think the decriminalization and the legalization, I do think that those are two separate issues for Muslims. I think that we should be I think that we can be for decriminalization and at the same time against legalizing it altogether, because the presence of it is not positive in our community. It doesn't have a good effect and a good impact. I would be for, I mean, I think Muslims should maintain their stances and their clarity on this. I would also say that, you know, think about this on a local level and the implications of this. As for abortion, I wrote abortion is a tricky issue also, because we really don't stand with either side of this debate. It's actually operating on a different premise altogether, which is, you know, the pro-choice, or, you know, it's operating more on the autonomy of a pregnant woman as opposed to, you know, anything in regards to the baby. And it's funny enough that Republicans and conservatives talk about this from a place of the power of state. A lot of times on the far left, they talk about this from the premise of the woman's choice to abort or not abort, and like, who's lost in all of this is the actual fetus itself. As Muslims, we believe in sanctifying the woman, the mother, and the fetus as well. But we really we don't, you know, like what was passed in Alabama is not what the Sharia would call us to. We do believe in legitimate reasons for abortion. We do believe in medical exceptions. We do have a sense, the majority of the ulama have historically seen, you know, up until 120 days that with very legitimacy, after 40 days, the 40 to 120, it becomes a stricter prohibition. But the majority of scholars have allowed for that, and the mother's life is always preferred to the child's life. So if there's a situation where the mother's life and the child's life are at odds, or you have to save the mother's life, then it is permissible in Islam. And I think that resonates with a lot of Americans, by the way. I think it resonates with a lot of people when you actually talk to them about that. Late-term abortions are different from bans on abortion altogether. And Muslims should be trying to usher in a middle understanding of that. Now, this is a long, drawn-out answer, but let's say a politician, however, is campaigning on a large platform. Again, this becomes redundant, or this becomes irrelevant once you have a politician that is campaigning on a very large platform. And let's say that as a part of that politician's platform that we overall agree with, there is the legalization of marijuana and full abortion rights up until, you know, even with a full-term baby, and making that just a decision between a medical care provider and a pregnant mother. I think that Muslims can still vote for a platform as a whole and a candidate, but at the same time, we just can't lose our own clarity on those things. That's the point that I was trying to make, I think, as a whole. We judge at that point when you have two large platforms where there are issues on each platform that we cannot sign off on, but at the same time, we register our own theological positions, our own moral stances, while choosing what we believe is the best of the two options in that situation. Allah ta'ala. You want to say anything else on weed? You said you know a lot about weed. You saw what weed. California.
Yes.
You got to talk about it.
If I curse in my mind, does it still count as a sin? It's actually got a lot of upvotes. So.
غفر الله لأمتي ما حدثت به أنفسها ما لم تقول أو تعمل به. Allah will forgive every person for what you say to yourself, so long as you don't verbalize it or act upon it. But it's not a good habit to curse people privately. So even in your own thoughts, but it's not sinful to have thoughts, right? It's sinful to be intentional about those thoughts or to act upon those thoughts. So, yeah.
I was going to ask, because somebody asked me this and I didn't have a good answer. What about if you don't say it to anybody, but you actually verbalize it, like you're in the car and you say it out loud? Inquiring minds want to know.
You're asking?
I'm asking you, yeah, just ask.
Is that allowed for?
This is unprecedented. Did not know. But it's a good idea, maybe next year.
The worry of some people are really worried, like, oh shoot, I always curse in the car at other drivers, what do I do?
Come up with a dhikr word in the place of that curse word. All right? Come up with a dhikr word in the place of that curse word.
Can I add something?
Okay? So scream Allahu Akbar. Scream takbir. When you're upset at someone and you're yelling at someone, scream Allahu Akbar. All right? Just come up with another way without cursing somebody else's father or using a profanity or cursing someone's dog or wishing death upon. Just come up with a dhikr word instead.
Just briefly to add to that, the scholars actually talk about the stages of your thoughts and how they manifest into actions. So it's not just important for your own sake, your own sanity to not be thinking about this stuff, but also the more you think about something, the more you internalize it, that eventually follows in line that train where it becomes into action, and then you've got yourself in cars screaming it out loud, and then you're going to say it in front of the person. So that it does have an effect and eventually will manifest physically.
You know, I don't know if you guys know this particular incident that happened, I believe, in either the Battle of Uhud or Badr, where one of the Sahaba was actually hit with a weapon, and he just let out a grunt. It was just like an ouch. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him something, I'm paraphrasing this, I'm sorry, but he said something along the lines of, if you had made a word of dhikr, the angels would have come down and held you up. Are any of you familiar with this story? I heard it in one of Yasir Qadhi's lectures, but I don't remember who the Sahaba was or, okay. But that is I'm very much paraphrasing that. Okay, how do we know that the Quran has not been changed?
Okay, so just, I can give a brief answer and let Sheikh Omar and Lubna finish it off, but so in terms of how, there's plenty of different ways you can understand this and answer this question, but one concept is the concept of mutawatir, something that's been narrated so many times through so many various avenues that you have, it's sort of, it becomes ma'lum min ad-din bid-durura. It becomes necessary knowledge, it becomes obvious knowledge. And so because you have so many chains of transmission, and you have so many different people from various parts of the world and the land are narrating the exact same thing, going all the way back. There's asanid, right? Chains back to the Prophet ﷺ. And that's also, you have the different recitations, right? You have the hafs, you have the warsh, you have various different types of recitation that all go back to also the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And you can actually, it's really cool. So when you get an ijazah in the Quran, you get the whole paper, and it goes all the way back to the reciter, goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's all been preserved. So we know that just based off of asanid, of those chains of narration, but also because it was narrated from various times and places in multiple different chains. So that's, I think, the brief and the answer brief answer that would suffice me. So hopefully that helps.
So I think, and I do just want to mention, just for the record, Ustad Lubna's on the board of Yaqeen. Sister Tesneem is our director of expanded learning at Yaqeen. So you got 3 Yaqeeners here, alhamdulillah. And at Yaqeen Institute, we have some great papers, alhamdulillah, on the preservation of the Quran and how to, some of the questions that come up, particularly with what about different modes of recitation and ahruf and qira'at, and some of those questions about different recitations. Alhamdulillah, the historical reliability of the Quran is not just established with great consensus within the tradition, within the deen, but it's also a widely acknowledged point through other academic avenues and methodologies as well, which is phenomenal, alhamdulillah, that Muslims recognize very early on the importance of preservation of the Quran, as Sister Tesneem mentioned, through the various ways, and there's tawatur, there's a multiplicity of avenues or people that memorize the Quran, and then the routes that took, and everyone who has an ijazah in Quran goes back through those particular routes. And the Muslims also recognized the ability or the importance early on of compiling the written Quran in accordance with all of that memorization, with all of those different Sahaba that memorized the Quran. The beauty of that, by the way, just look at this room, all right? In this room alone, how many of you are hafad of Quran? Sorry, you're not showing off. I just want to see if you... All right, one.
No halfway hands. Raise them up high. I want to be proud of you. I want to be proud of you. Allahu Akbar.
If we had no written Quran in this room alone, we would be able to come together and be able to get it down on paper. It would take a very long time to get it all written down. But amongst ourselves, just a few hafad in this room, we'd be able to figure that out. Imagine the Sahaba who were around the Prophet ﷺ when it was being revealed and who memorized it in his presence, coming together to assemble it in written form and then making multiple copies of that to be sent in different parts of the world. So,
is it haram to attend weddings that have alcohol?
I feel like you put on the spot multiple times here. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir fala yajlis ala ma'idatan yushrabu alayhi al-khamr." That whoever believes in Allah on the last day, let them not sit at a table where khamr, where alcohol is being served. There are exceptions to this. The Prophet ﷺ was basically condemning tacit approval, when a person gives approval by their presence, right? So if 3 people are hanging out, 2 of them are drinking alcohol, third one's hanging out, then that gives an idea of approval. The fatwa would differ for people that are in corporate environments, for example, or are in very uncomfortable situations. It would also differ for converts, right, that are still transitioning out of certain things. And that's where you fear Allah as much as you can. When it comes to attending, just to preclude any other questions that come, this is a very, as an imam, this becomes very challenging because sometimes I get invited to a wedding to say a few words, and it's a very problematic wedding. And I could do one of 2 things. I could shun it because of its problematic elements, or I could say, all right, well, I'll go there and I'll see if I can give some nasiha or say something good to bring some sort of life to that gathering. And that's really a judgment call as to whether or not my presence will be beneficial to the attendees over there to actually do something different, or if I'm going to be harming them and harming myself in the process. So let's say, for example, you have an entire Muslim family, right? You're a Muslim family and you have a child, and your child is going to have khamr at the wedding. And you going, or your cousin or your brother or your sister, whatever it is, you going is going to validate that practice and perhaps perpetuate that practice, as opposed to you abstaining would send a message to others that this should not become an acceptable practice amongst us, right? So it's a judgment call that requires a lot of hikmah, requires a lot of wisdom, and generally speaking, a Muslim should try to avoid those types of contexts unless there's some sort of superior wisdom and benefit that could ultimately bring people away from that practice in the long term.
The hadith, whoever prays Fajr in congregation then sits and remains being with Allah until the sun rises and prays 2 rak'ahs will have a reward like that of Hajj and Umrah. Are you required to stay in the same spot that you prayed in, or can you stay within the same room or building? Can you take a bathroom break? All that.
The hadith is about masjid, or about the salah, the idea of remaining in a state of dhikr. So if you are in your spot and you intend to be in that spot and you get uncomfortable, so you have to move a little bit, or you have to put your back against something, or you have to take a break and go to the bathroom because your bladder is really, really getting there and you're going to be distracting your dhikr, inshallah, the reward will be written down for you in all of those situations.
Is vaping, cigarettes, hookahs, any other sort of inhaled drug, are these haram and are they considered intoxicants?
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us in the Quran, do not send yourself into destruction. So I'm even talking about nicotine. Because I wanted so badly to talk about marijuana, we'll go on to the next step. But let's just even take vaping nicotine or smoking nicotine or however you want to take in nicotine. You can patch it, you can chew it. Allahu Akbar, there's so many different choices. It is proven that it does cause cancer. So that is sending yourself into destruction, so it's haram. There's no other way to see it. The idea then now of going to marijuana, that is an intoxicant. So now you're talking about vaping it. How do you do it? It doesn't really matter. Some people will say there's a medical necessity for pain management or for other reasons. That is something you can take a personal fatwa in, but also my understanding too, that this is not the first thing. We don't take it so lax and say, well, there's a medical benefit, so I'll take it. That is not our go-to to go towards an intoxicant. Well, so alcohol could also help too. There are also, even with pain, even with narcotics. I remember my son had massive spinal surgery, like his whole back is cut from neck to the bottom of his back, an extreme amount of pain. And as soon as he started saying hallucinations, I took it like after 2 days and I just dumped it in the trash and threw it up, took it apart, it's gone, right? Because of the potential. He can, alhamdulillah, he was able to take Tylenol, Advil. The point is, we don't just make it easier on ourselves. We'll say, well, there's a medicinal benefit. Well, there's a benefit in a lot of things. Allah told us about the benefit of khamr, right? He told us about the benefit of alcohol. So in it, there's some good, and I'm paraphrasing, and in it, there is some bad, and the bad outweighs the good. So we go with that, and we don't try to find any other loopholes. There's no khair in it.
And I'll also just add to that, it's just something, subhanAllah, really interesting. The last thing that Malcolm X wrote, the Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, rahimahullah, when he was leaving Mecca, Mecca the beautiful, Mecca the great, Mecca the place of wonders and wonderful food and springs and and Hardee's and Smashburger. The last thing that Malcolm X wrote, leaving Mecca, he said that alcoholism is the ugliest thing he saw out of Europe. He said cigarette addiction, smoking, was the ugliest thing he saw in the Muslim world. And he was shocked by it because when he joined the Nation of Islam, he quit smoking. Like when you join the Nation of Islam, you don't smoke or drink. And so he had been sober and wasn't smoking or drinking for all those years, and he goes to Hajj, and people are walking around with cigarettes and smoking. So he's like, it resonates so poorly with him that, subhanAllah, I mean, how could it be like I left the Nation of Islam, came to Sunni Islam, and I see everyone around me smoking cigarettes. So something to consider, you know, about his situation there.
I always like what Sheikh Yasser just says. If you believe that it's halal, just say Bismillah before you do it. See how you feel about that. Speaking of that, next question. Is music halal if it doesn't talk about killing, doing drugs, sexual abuse?
Can I be honest about this? It saddens me that I get the same questions every single year and every single convention, every single conference. And what I've come to realize is that most people who ask, and this is not to dismiss the questioner, but most people who ask these questions are looking for validation for something that they've already decided to do in life. And it's just my intense experience with many Muslims is like when people say, is music haram? I'm like, if I say it's haram, are you going to quit it? Like, no. I'm like, all right then. You know, then don't ask me, you know. So I'll just give it in brief. What is haram by consensus? What is haram by consensus is music that has bad messaging in it, that has inappropriate messaging, and that violates Islamic ethics and principles in it. What is disputed, what is halal, not by consensus, but by a majority, is the deaf and the drums and percussion and things of that sort. What is disputed is the usage of musical instruments, with the majority having said it was prohibited, and a minority of very credentialed and credible scholars saying that it's permitted if the messaging is good. My advice to people is, if you're comfortable, if it's not something that you do and you abide by that majority opinion, alhamdulillah, good for you. If you're weaning off of, you know, the music that's prohibited, which is sawt al-shaytan, I mean, by Quranic terminology, right? You're filling your head with garbage, and that does have serious psychological impact on you. Serious, you know, implicit, sometimes not implicit at all, but what is this doing to your soul when you're listening to that stuff on a regular basis? If you're trying to wean off of that, and in the process, you're going to engage in a large quantity of music with instruments and with good messaging or neutral messaging, good for you. If you follow the opinion that instruments are halal with good messaging, my advice to you is still to not develop an attachment to it to a point that you lose the Quran. Even if you're listening to all those humming nasheeds all the time, which can be really annoying, that have no instruments whatsoever, but you're listening to those all. I enjoy poetry, I might enjoy nasheeds, I might enjoy some of that, but even if you enjoy that, don't lose the value of the Quran. Like when you get in the car and when you got your time to listen to something, don't lose the value of the Quran and listening to the Quran and renewing the Quran and reviewing the Quran. So that's my nasiha through it all. And I hope I wasn't dismissive to the questioner. I'm just saying that these questions come up so often. I know about 5 of the other questions that I know that we're going to get asked. And the idea here is it comes back to your personal willpower, inshallah ta'ala, and what you're comfortable with the night ta'ala to go forward. I don't know if you want to add something, Sister Lubna, to that. Or Tesneem. Do you disagree?
I agree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. No, I did want to share just for people. So just I was contemplating whether or not I should share, but I will share, inshallah, that just briefly, as somebody who grew up listening to music for a very long time, I did see myself, and even in the course of learning Quran, and I could see, and I remember hearing from a scholar said that 2 loves cannot compete in the same heart, and that's the love of music and the love of Quran. And I've experienced that myself. You know, once in a while, I'm making the long drive. I used to make a 63-mile drive, in the middle of the night to take my kids back and forth because we missed, we moved and we missed family. So we would drive, so I said, okay, Quran, mashallah, is very soothing, so it puts me to sleep. That's not a bad thing, it's soothing and I love it, but it's not good at 12 o'clock at night and when you're driving. So, and I do fall asleep in the car. So I would put on music and I would switch it if it's bad. And then, subhanAllah, I found myself, one thing leads to another. Oh yeah, I heard that song, that reminds me of a long time ago. And then the next day, khalas, it's not because you're tired anymore. It's like, oh wow, would like to hear this song again. And it does have, really, truly, the wisdom is there. The 2 loves cannot compete in the same heart. So some of the practical, exactly what Sheikh Omar said, the practical, I'm telling you, the feeling that I have, it's absolutely true. So you want to be able to spend the most time with Quran and not let the other side take over. So it's better not to indulge.
Can I add something real quick? Also, there's this obsession with always having to listen to something. And we make it so much of a habit, and obviously that is largely a part of music, that you're driving somewhere, you have to listen to something, you're working out, you have to listen to something. There's always constant need to fill our heads, and that we can't, challenge ourselves sitting for a moment of silence. And those moments of silence are critical. If you want to be sort of the forefront in whatever field you're doing, you're not going to get inspiration while you're listening to music, right? You're going to get inspiration those moments where you're going for a run and you're not listening to anything, you're looking at the nature around you, and it's quiet and you can think properly. And when you train your mind to constantly be comfortable with silence, you'd be surprised as to things that will come to you and the reflections that you'll make. There's a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he talks about that, right? He talks about if you really want to get into deep work, if you really want to make a change in any work, whether we're talking about school, your office job, anything, that can't be done unless you get rid of every single distraction. And of course, the most obvious distraction being listening to anything. And so this is good, again, like I said in yesterday's talk, all of these recommendations are only going to help you. It's only going to benefit you. It's going to make you a better person. And so you want to think about also just the positive that it has on your life when you cut back on listening to music.
Jazakumullah khair.
Be scrolling through the comment questions.
Yeah, I want to know.
I'm going to challenge you. I'm not going to give you those 5.
What are the rules of hijab when it comes to step families, stepfather, stepbrothers, stepsisters?
Don't make me answer these questions, please. The rules the rules of what makes someone a mahram are established through very specific routes. And so I would recommend that person to actually ask personally, inshallah ta'ala. Generally speaking though, so the mahram, if my father marries someone, then she is mahram to me permanently. But again, if you mean stepmother, stepfather, as in two parents, sets of kids, there are different circumstances that exist. But generally speaking, it is established throughout. But again, this very specific circumstance of this person is probably best for them to ask, inshallah ta'ala. So if you marry, so father's spouse, mother's spouse, those become permanently mahram and establishes the same things that blood parents would establish in that sense for you.
What would you say to people who are considering adopting but may struggle with, what if I have to wear the hijab, or what if she has to wear the hijab in front of me? How do you go about that?
There's actually, so if you go to Yaqeen's website and you search adoption and foster care, I did a pretty extensive lecture on it some time ago, and the ahkam, the rulings regarding it. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah talked about the situation of Salim Mawla Abi Hudayfa, and he said it's not makhsus nor mansukh. It's not abrogated, but there are certain ways in which a person could be made mahram even after the age of 2, but those are exceptional circumstances, they're not general circumstances. So before 2, it's a lot easier to establish that chain of being mahram. After 2, I would say that, look, it shouldn't be an all or nothing, right? So there foster care and establishing certain arrangements within foster care, if you have the capability to do so, where obviously you'll develop somewhat of a relationship with that person that won't be mahram, and it might pose some sort of a hardship, but there's great ajr and benefit in it, and it could be for a temporary period until you could get someone on their feet and help them, inshallah ta'ala, with whatever they need in society. So I just recommend them to watch the lecture. The notes are there if you can't bear the whole lecture. And I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that, Tesneem. I do think it's a forgotten sunnah though, and I really do hope as a community we can, my hope in the ta'ala is that we have multiple agencies that start to come up. I know there are a few. I know that Ikan Relief is doing some work on it in Dallas, and there are some other organizations that are trying to come forward now. So I do hope as a community though we really do move forward and sort of assert that sunnah of taking care of children that are in need of stable homes.
So this kind of talks about a more broad question, but I'll ask the specific question. Can we lie on our taxes and instead give the money to charity instead of a government that spends it on wars and unjust wars? And I got similar questions to this, where basically, can I trade a sin for a good deed, essentially?
Who's trying to get us arrested here? To get Mass's tax deductible status taken away? Who did that? All right. No, you can't lie on your taxes. If you want to change the way that your tax dollars are spent, then do more in policy to get them spent to stop them from being spent in the wrong way. And let's organize properly, inshallah ta'ala, so that it's not spent in the wrong ways that it is right now. But in the meantime, we got to suck it up. There are other ways to be religious and righteous than, mashallah, cheating on your taxes. What was the second question?
It's just more, I got a couple questions that basically say, I'll do this, but it might be haram, but I'll benefit the Muslim community in another way. Can you talk a little bit about, where do we draw the line?
Personal benefit, or?
They'll say either personal benefit or the Muslim ummah.
So trading a sin for a good deed. أتبع السيئة الحسنة تمحها إن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات. The Prophet ﷺ talked about following up a sin with a good deed. The Quran talked about good deeds wiping out and expiating sins. But the idea of justifying the presence of a sin with no intention of ridding yourself of it by saying, well, I'll do this good deed, and one hand washes the other, is not acceptable. To say, I'll just continue to do the sin and then I'll continue to do this good deed and hope that it'll weigh it out. The cure for sin is tawbah, is repentance, and not doing a good deed simultaneously, but doing a good deed as a means of that tawbah and as a part of that process of turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Can you explain the hadith regarding women ناقصات عقل ودين?
Say that again?
That's your question.
ناقصات عقل ودين.
Refer them to the paper.
Okay, so I briefly answered this, and I think it might have been the same person who asked, but I'll reiterate. So there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says, referring to women, ناقصات عقل ودين, that they are deficient in intellect and religion. Number one, most importantly, we have a yaqeen paper coming out that's going to deal with that, so you can be on the lookout for that. But it was interesting. I was talking to Dr. Brown about this, who works in hadith, and he brought up a really good point. When you look at the context of the hadith, it was years before I was informed of the context. It's the day of Eid. The Prophet ﷺ is coming to the women outside the day of Eid. So that context enough tells us sort of like the seriousness or lack thereof in the Prophet's words necessarily. And so some scholars actually said that this scenario was the Prophet ﷺ talking to women in jest, right? So, he's coming out and he's talking to the women. It's day of Eid. It's a happy, obvious, very happy mood. And the Prophet said, oh, you women, and you guys are, deficient, naqisat aql din, because you are not grateful to your husbands. And so I thought that was a really interesting understanding of the hadith, because it makes sense, absolutely contextually, right? That the Prophet ﷺ is coming here and saying, well, sort of like, oh, we talk like that all the time, right? Oh, you kids always up to no good, you're never thankful. So, that sort of rhetoric, if you can relate to it. But so that was one understanding, one interpretation that was new to me, that I thought was pretty satisfying. But also, if you put it, again, back to my lecture, if you put it in context with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and you look at the fact that the hadith corpus, who is at the forefront? Who is one of the main hadith narrators? You have Aisha radiallahu anha, right? And so if you're saying that you're naqisat, if you're deficient in intellect, you can't trust a woman narrator. You can't trust someone who's going to be connecting you back to the Prophet. How can you, right? But of course, we know that women were at the forefront for centuries. They were at the forefront of narrating a hadith and serving as significant parts of the chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ. And so when you look at it as a whole, it's, to me, that concept of, okay, well, the Prophet ﷺ did not literally mean it is something that I found to be one way to understand it. And inshallah, our yaqeen paper will go into more depth in that regard.
You want to say anything? I would just, had the Prophet ﷺ meant it in the literal sense, then how could he say that Maryam alayhi salam and Khadija radiallahu anha and Asya, and Fatima were perfect in their deen? And if there is a naqs in them, if there's a deficiency in them, just for the sake of them being women. So there's an action item to it too, which is the Prophet ﷺ was encouraging sadaqah, making up for those good deeds. This idea that a woman would miss some of the salawat or some of the actions during her cycle, and the Prophet ﷺ was encouraging them to make up for that with some sadaqah or with something that would help them get ahead and maximize that reward. I think that's very powerful. And subhanAllah, so there's that paper that Tesneem worked on, Sister Tesneem worked on, 5 minutes about women in Islamic law, where she talked about testimony and the idea of a woman having half testimony and half inheritance, and some of the things, the misconceptions surrounding that. Paper that I got to work on, subhanAllah, was one of the most powerful sayings that I ever come across from Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where he says, كُنَّا لَا نَعُدُّ لِلنِّسَاءِ شَيْئًا حَتَّى أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِنَّ مَا أَنزَلَ وَقَسَمَ لَهُنَّ مَا قَسَمَ. That we used to have no regard for women in the days of ignorance until Allah revealed about them what He revealed, and He allocated to them what He allocated to them. And so the men of that society felt like women were given an honor through Islam. The women in that society felt like Islam had honored them and given them an unprecedented status. And so you find all of the hadith about how the women themselves viewed that revelation as it was coming down, and the Prophet ﷺ speaking to them, that they felt empowered by it. I think that's very telling, right? That the sense that women got from the Prophet ﷺ, the type of relationship that they had with him as a community, was a very empowering one, where they could ask those types of questions, where they could have those types. And the Prophet ﷺ is a sincere advisor to all of us, meaning, one of the reasons why we have su'a dhann, why we assume bad of each other when people say things, there's a lack of trust of a person's intentions, trust of where they're coming from. The more you develop trust with someone, the more you'll appreciate when they're giving you advice, even if it's harder advice, that it's not coming from a mean place or a diminishing place or a place of disempowering you or belittling you, because you trust them. There's no agenda there. There's no intention to impugn or to belittle. And I think it's very beautiful that the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with both men and women was that his nasiha was always taken as, look, this is to benefit us so that we can get ahead and we can do better and we can do more good and things of that sort. Not that the Prophet ﷺ was ever trying to impugn anyone or put anyone down. And that's a level, that's when you know a person to where you know their intentions, and so their words come to you in accordance with their known good intentions, as opposed to seeing them in any negative light. Because you know, when you hear a hadith that seems to be belittling, I think psychologically you probably hear it in the voice of a person who has actually belittled you. Or you've heard someone using an actual belittling voice, and then you hear the Prophet ﷺ's words in that person's voice and from that person's place, and that's not who's talking. It's the Prophet ﷺ who had this loving, incredible relationship with his community of nasiha, of sincere advice, open advice to both men and to women at all times, and we have to remember that. And husbands that would misquote those ahadith, even in jest, with their spouses, don't do that. It's hurtful. It'll distance someone from the deen. Don't do it with your children. Don't do it with your spouses. And I say that, you know, to both husbands and wives, mothers and fathers. Don't use the Prophet ﷺ's words to gain leverage on the other person, because then you might cause the other person to start feeling aversion to the Prophet ﷺ himself and to the religion, because you're abusing them or gaining leverage upon them using the deen. And that becomes very problematic, as opposed to going to the Quran and the Sunnah as sort of a problem solver for us. It's like, let me use this to beat you over the head with it and say the Prophet ﷺ said this and put you down. And so that you're almost going to force that person to not just repudiate you, who they were arguing with in the first place, but I'm going to argue with the Prophet ﷺ now too. And that person also puts themselves in a dangerous position as a result of that.
Okay. I've struggled with praying for almost 15 years. I make dua for Allah to help me pray, but I never am able to pray consistently. Any advice? How do I fix this?
I can just give some life advice in regard to that. So I plan my day around salawats. If I know I'm going to be in the library, if I know if I'm going to be in a cafe, I plan, okay, I'm going to go spend a few hours at a cafe, I'm going to pray Dhuhr and immediately go. I'm going to wait until, go way before Dhuhr so I know I have enough time, and then I'll make it back for Dhuhr. And it seems like very obvious advice, but it makes a huge difference. Because if the days that I'm in a rush and I can't plan for it, that's when I'm scrambling to pray. But if you start your day and you know exactly where you're going to be when salawats come in, then you know for a fact that you'll have at least the time and place to pray. Because one of the biggest reasons a lot of people don't pray, among many others, is the fact that it's like, well, I'm out, I'm shopping, I don't know where to pray, or I'm at the library, there's no place to pray. So when you plan ahead of time and you know where you're going to be and what your schedule is going to look like, it makes things a lot easier. And so, yeah, it might start off with you every single day having to write it down and actively think about it. But once that becomes a habit, you're not going to have to really think too hard about it. You'll know, all right, starting my day where I'm going to be, okay, got it, right? And so that's something that is extremely beneficial to me and hopefully is helpful.
Can you repeat that first part of the question? For the last 15 years, they've struggled?
Yeah, they make dua to Allah, but I dismissed it. But the point is they've been struggling for 15 years to stay consistent. They make dua to Allah to help them, but they can't seem to fix it. And
to add to that too, I would say, keep it up. Don't let shaitan trick you and say, well, since I'm not praying, we start to use this type of logic. Well, I'm not praying consistently anyway, so why should I be doing this next thing? So why should I be doing this next thing? I'm a hypocrite. I'm trying to fast, but I don't even pray consistently. Try not to let yourself fall into that trap, because if shaitan can't lead you to something bad, he'll make you stop doing something good by getting into your head. He can't read your mind. I always have to just clarify that. But through your actions and and sensing, not sensing, sorry, but watching your habits, he knows your habits, right? So you will fall into that trap if you start saying, well, you know what, 15 years, forget about it. I'm never going to get it. Keep faking it until you make it. Keep making the dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually will, through your efforts, will put that love into your heart until it becomes something meaningful and something that you won't want to miss. And taking those practical steps, fitting it into your day. If Fajr is an issue, making sure you put 5 alarms. If Isha is an issue for you, making sure that you just do that right away and then go to sleep. So, actually making a plan is one thing, and also not letting things get to your head and saying, you know what, what's the point? I'm not good at this. Keep at it, and inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you successful at it.
What is your response to people who say that we should boycott Hajj because of what's going on with Yemen?
It's a tough one. The response to those who say we could boycott Hajj because of what's going on in Yemen, I don't see it as the most helpful, most productive way to deal with the situation. I think if you go down that route, and by the way, let me say this as well though, I wouldn't belittle everyone that's talked about that or that's entertained that idea as being somehow disrespectful towards the Deen or hating the religion and things of that sort. I think it comes from a good place. I think a lot of people really are frustrated with some of the things that are happening, and feel like this could be a means of enacting some sort of change. So full disclosure, I go to Hajj every year. So obviously my position on this is clear. With that being said, taking very clear stances on the bombing of Yemen and some of the atrocious things that happened, advocating for policy changes, looking for ways to stop that, to sanction, to uphold the dignity. I just think that it's not the best way. Now, if a person feels like it's heavy on their conscience to go on multiple umrahs and multiple hajjs, I understand. I just would not, especially your fard hajj, I would not do that. And I wouldn't, and again, for me, I go to guide groups, obviously. I don't make money off of Hajj, if anyone has that. I mean, shaitan comes in people's minds. It's not, but it's definitely, there's a personal benefit. But I guide groups that are there. People that go to do Hajj, you get a chance to guide them to go through that experience with them, and it's a beautiful experience. And Arafah is special every year. I just don't think it's the best route to go, and I can appreciate why someone probably is like, but they use that money to do this, this, and this, and that. We've had some pretty bad people in charge of Hajj and Umrah in the past that have used Hajj money and Umrah money. And I can't think of a time in history where Muslim scholars thought that that was the best course of action to take. So I just think that there are other ways, inshallah ta'ala, that we can do our best to try to see the changes that we want to see fulfilled without taking that type of an action. I also think that the effectiveness of such a boycott would be extremely limited unless this was something that was, throughout the ummah, and it could actually have like a meaningful impact on that financial stream. The reality is that if all of the American Hujjaj were to boycott Hajj, you're only talking about, I don't know, what's 10,000 people maximum. So it's not, which is not going to happen. I mean, people are still going to go to Hajj. So I just don't think it's the right course of action. But I don't diminish or dismiss. I ask Allah to protect me. Those people that come from a genuine place of moral outrage that want to see those changes enacted. That's just where I come from on that. Not sure if you want to add something.
Anyone else? 2 more questions, inshallah. How do I increase the quality of my salah?
Well, if you read our paper, no, really though, we do have a paper, How to Be a Mindful Muslim, The Lost Art of Contemplation. We have a lot of papers on Yaqeen about spirituality. And essentially what it talks about, it sort of goes back to my comment on music, right? So if you practice mindfulness, what's mindfulness? If you practice the habit of just spending a few minutes a day, not doing anything except training your mind to focus on your dhikr. So if it's a word, it's a phrase. For me, astaghfirullah works. In fact, it's great to put you to sleep, if that helps. But really, if you focus, even just start off with a minute a day, and you'd be surprised that minute feels like an hour when you first start. If you practice for a few minutes a day and you can train your mind, and I do this especially at night because my mind is usually racing after a long day. I've read certain things, I've seen certain things, watched certain things, and just like your brain is all over the place. And I have this magic trick where everyone knows that I can sleep, standing up, basically. And one way, it's genetic, that's not, but now, because now as I get older, and things are, there's my mind is bogged down by just so many different things. It takes more than 30 seconds to fall asleep, and I'm like, oh my God, like, how do I do this? And so that was one thing that I found so helpful. It was that, okay, let me try doing this mindfulness trick when I'm going to sleep. And basically, you have to zone out everything around you, every single thought that comes to your mind, and you go back to your magic word, whatever word, if it's astaghfirullah, la ilaha illallah, subhanallah, anything. Pick a word that you find is helpful to you, and you would be shocked at how hard it is if your mind is untrained. And so when you do train your mind, I notice immediately when it comes to salah, because you pray salah and you're like, oh, that's where I left my keys. Oh no, okay, next I have to go to the bathroom, and then I'm gonna do this, and you think about your whole routine after salah. We all go through this, right? And then I noticed that after practicing for a few weeks of just, even it was just, I promise, 2 minutes a day, I noticed that it was so much easier to focus in salah. And so I tried a lot of things. I was like, okay, let me just read the interpretation of this ayah and the stories behind this, which were all very helpful. But then it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying my salah, but my mind kept wandering. And then I realized it was because I don't ever train my mind to focus on one thing and really focus, zone out everything. And so that's been working for me, and I would definitely encourage that.
I tell people, subhanAllah, that 5 minutes before salah is just so crucial. Because otherwise you're going to spend the first few minutes of, your mind can't just switch from this to that to a place of silence. You need to have a break. So if you are looking at your phone up until the moment of salah, or listening to something up until the moment of salah, or conversing, the first few minutes of salah, you're just regurgitating thoughts. And so you're not going to have a chance to really enjoy your salah or get into your salah because you're still and then, let's face it, if you've lost the first or second rak'ah, you just kind of resign yourself that this just isn't a very good salah. Let's go ahead and finish it off this way, right? Maybe I'll get this khushu' thing down next time. So spending a few minutes before salah, and I'm guilty sometimes, and sometimes the demands of the day don't allow us to, but when you have a chance to, spend a few minutes before salah, getting yourself focused on what's about to happen of salah. It's really positive, inshallah ta'ala. Also, slow down. It's very simple. When you're praying, take the time to read the word, take the time to go to the next step. Slow down. Slow down. If you're paying attention, if you're slowing down, and you find yourself getting lost, go back to where you remember, in the recitation at least. Don't come back up to qiyam or ruku' because you said, I lost myself somewhere there. Go back to where you remember and repeat and just try to go very slow until you can get into a flow with that conversation in salah that's important in order to make that, to go forward. And also, Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda has something. Sheikh Abdul Nasser taught a class on prayer called Meaningful Prayer. Meaningful Prayer. Mm-hmm. And I know he did it as an on-site seminar. I think he has an online iteration of it. But mashallah, I've recommended that to a lot of people as well, and it was very beneficial to them through Qalam, that he teach meaningful prayer.
Yeah, again, and I went on that website as well a long time ago. It's called, right now it's at Qalam Institute, and you can just find meaningful prayer. It's $65 to register for it, and that'll give you lifetime access for it. I found it very beneficial. as well. Once again, that's Qalam Institute, QALAM Institute. And then just go look for meaningful prayer. I was even able to just Google that. And again, that's by Abdel Nasser Jenga, who will be at the convention, inshallah. Before we wrap it up, I would just like to ask each speaker for just 1 or 2 minutes of any final thoughts or random thoughts, anything at all that you would like to say before we conclude, inshallah. Whoever would like to start.
I'll go last.
Do we have to go first? In order.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. I'll use these 2 minutes to share a couple of things that people have brought to my attention, especially after the underserved talk that I gave. And some people wanted to bring light to their situation, pointing out that a lot of other people are struggling with them. And so I wanted to honor that and share that. Again, in wanting to make us sensitive to the needs of the ummah. Be sensitive to all of us, for all of us to be sensitive and understand that you're not always going to be able to see the struggles of other people. And it may not be very obvious to you when we're planning things, when we're inviting people, and we forget that there's one sister that's always sitting by herself in the masjid that nobody talks to, maybe because she has a different skin color, or she's not part of that clique, or because she moved into town recently. Do we know anything about her? Do we know if she recently got divorced, if she lost her parents in an accident? Why is she by herself? But how do we even know if we don't approach her? So I want to kind of bring to light the struggle of single mothers, people that are by themselves, whether they be men or women, that they don't have family. Do you invite them over? Do you ask about them when you see them every single day in your masjid? You know, if you ever notice every day they're not with somebody, go talk to them, go invite them, get to know them. There are people out there struggling with blended families, with new stepchildren, and they don't know how to navigate that. And so far, I think they say they don't find any resources written by Muslims. They would love to get the spiritual aspect along with the practical aspect of how to love somebody else's kid, right? Especially when they're a teenager. And what about children, people in divorce situations where they don't have access to their child, they're being manipulated by the other spouse. There's so much struggle and pain out there, and somebody else brought the issue also of people who are here and they're undocumented, and they're also part of the Muslim community. And they want to legitimately build a life here. They are earning money, they want to get married, and I'm not advocating for anything illegal, right? But I'm saying this is the reality along with a lot of other undocumented people. And unfortunately, whenever they try to approach the subject of marriage, they get shut down and says, well, you don't have your paperwork, right? And I know the fear about that as well. But again, realizing that people have these struggles that we don't always see, and for us to kind of open our eyes and be aware that there's a lot of support that's needed. And inshallah, the more that we can create this programming, these support groups, try to connect people, try to provide the resources for people that are struggling. And just in general, when you go out in the world, be an ambassador, right? Especially in these Muslim spaces, don't be the one that's turning somebody else away. Be the one that's welcoming and smiling and getting to know people, inshallah. There's so much goodness in it, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. Tesneem?
Just briefly, based off of a lot of the questions I got both yesterday and today, I noticed there was a very clear theme. A lot of people came up to me and said, there's this hadith, there's this ayah, it doesn't sit well with me, how do I understand it? And I want to remind you all the necessity of, in many situations, being patient. Because I go through this day in and day out, and I guarantee you there's some questions that it took years to answer, and when I got that answer, it was incredible. And some questions have still not been answered. So don't always expect that every question that you might have, that you're going to get the answer that's going to satisfy you. And that's okay. We need to learn to be okay with that. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to always discover everything and know the wisdom behind something. And that's, again, part of being intellectually humble, is that you're willing and you can tell yourself that, guess what, I don't know, and that's okay. Because there's this culture of, because we have such quick access to information that, if I can't find it on Google, if I can't find the answer now immediately, that immediate satisfaction, then that is going to affect my iman, that's going to affect everything. It's okay. There's certain things that I still don't understand and that I deal with directly with my research. And I'm just pushing forward, always making dua that one day I will get that answer. But you know what? One day I might not, and that's okay. Because when you understand the Islamic tradition, when you understand the Quran and Sunnah, if that's something I didn't make clear today and yesterday, that when you look at everything holistically, it's incredible. There's only good that this religion wants for you. There's only good that the Prophet ﷺ wants for us. And when we can really understand that and learn to really embody that, it's life-changing. And that's something that will get you past any doubt, will get you past any question that you have. It'll keep you pushing forward. But of course, always encouraging you to seek knowledge and to look for the answers, but know that it's okay if you don't get them right away.
Barakallah fiki. MashaAllah. All right. You got a little round of applause there. MashaAllah. Ahsanti. So first of all, how many of you have the app for Yaqeen Institute? Raise your hand if you have the app. All right, so everyone download the app, the Yaqeen Institute app, please. It's free. So that's my first shameless plug in the last 2 minutes.
Okay.
But it's free, because a lot of the questions that were asked, again, we said, go read this paper, go read that paper. Alhamdulillah, this is here for you. We do this because we really do believe that our community can benefit from it, inshallah. So just go benefit from it. Everything there is free. The infographics, the papers, the videos, everything else that comes with it, inshallah ta'ala. But real advice, and that is real advice, but additional advice. Sometimes we're so busy looking for this grand opening to something that I can do so that I can feel meaningful and purposeful, this amazing good deed, this great legacy I'm going to leave behind, my mark on humanity, that we miss out on the simple, great good deeds that are right in front of us. And we don't pay attention to the amazing things that we can do. Trying to word this without, but let me be very frank here. I would trade a day in the khidmah of my mother, rahmatullah alayha. I would trade everything I've accomplished in my life for a day. I would count a day in khidmah to my mother, rahmatullah alayha, more than anything else I've ever done in my life. All of it. And I'm pretty sure, mashallah, there's, I'm not gonna, I don't even want to turn this into a joke. There are khidmah as service. Thank you so much for asking that. The simple ability to kiss a parent's hand, to take them out, to respond to their needs, to care for them. The Prophet ﷺ sent people home from Uhud for this. You understand the magnitude of that? Like the Prophet ﷺ sent people home from Uhud for this, from battle in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, to serve their parents. And so many of us wait until we lose them. And I hate when youth make that mistake. If your parents are alive, be in their khidmah. You're not going to accomplish anything greater or grander than the dua or the smile of your mother. And if your mother is gone, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on her and have mercy on all of our parents, your father, but your parents. Jannah's there. They're your gate to Jannah. Jannah is either at her feet or your father is your gate to Jannah. No, I'm not justifying parental abuse. I'm just saying that these are the good deeds that form the basis of our religion. And if the Prophet ﷺ sent someone home from Uhud for this, don't waste that opportunity if you have it. If your parents are alive, be in their khidmah. Make them happy for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maintain that connection with them. Bidnillahi ta'ala. I'm telling you personally that I don't consider a day, I don't consider everything I've personally done in terms of da'wah. I would take my entire da'wah and I'd put it on a scale next to one day of khidmah to my mom, Allah yarhamha, and I would think that's greater. I would hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it all, obviously, but that would be more precious to me and more special to me. So keep in their service, bidnillahi ta'ala, if you can, and don't miss out on the great deeds that are right in front of you that often are lost in the pursuit of what is great on a societal level or in terms of public impact. Allah ta'ala.
Jazakumullah khair. So before, in wrapping up this.